Hey guys, it's two guys in hockey talk. I'm Bevel and
And I'm Evan, and we're back with tonight's roundtable at Two Guys in Hockey Talk. Man, we always got a special treat for you here. So grab another bevy, pull out the popcorn, because this is going to be one show that you're glad you didn't miss. So before I pass it over to Pavel, we're going to come back, buddy, because we want to talk. You're wearing a Rangers jersey, and right in behind you, we see a Capitals jersey. And if you followed the incident Monday night, we're going to have a little conversation around that. But without further ado, why don't you go ahead and introduce us to our guest tonight?
Awesome. Yeah, we've got the very well-known, well-renowned writer, Mr. Alex. Alex, how you doing?
I'm doing good, guys. How about yourself?
Doing well. Thank you for coming on the show. I don't know how Evan convinced you without a beard, but clearly it worked. And so, and I think you've got it going on pretty well. So I'm going to say you have a better beard than Evan. So good for you. We wanted to bring you on and wanted to ask kind of where your love for hockey, for the passion for the game came up, and how you kind of got into both broadcasting and writing.
It's kind of funny. I'm the only one in my family that didn't play. Growing up, interestingly enough, my three brothers played, so I grew up in the rink, which my father ended up taking over when I was in 8th grade. But it was him and his father who were just hockey diehards. My grandfather was a huge Bruins fan. My dad was a Bruins fan, and then in the mid-'90s, kind of went over to Hartford for a few years, and then they decided to pick up and leave. But hockey was big. I mean, I went to tons of games when I was a kid. Back in the early Joe Thornton years in Boston, where they really weren't any good. And, you could walk up on game night and find yourself a ticket in the lower bowl. It was honestly crazy back in those days. But I spent a lot of time going to Bruins games, and between those two, just really became a big hockey fan, and it's just kind of stayed with me.
So, I mean, you were just mentioning during the Joe Thornton era.
Yeah.
What do you think? That was a great trade, huh?
I remember waking up. I was in 6th grade. This is 05-06. And I remember waking up one morning in I don't remember if it was late November, early December, but I was shocked because that's before Twitter. Like I would wake up in the morning and you would turn on whether it was ESPN or NESN out here or whatever to get your news. And I honestly thought they were joking I couldn't believe it. That was a complete shock. Because again, Red Sox just won a World Series. The Patriots have won 3 Super Bowls. At that point, I'm too young to realize that this isn't how it's supposed to go. There's too much winning. That's not what it's supposed to be. So I was shocked. And that was the final. I don't want to say the final straw, but I was always Oilers and Bruins. And then between that and then at the deadline, the Oilers went out and they got the other guy from the Bruins. I loved him, Sergei Samsonov. So it was kind of that was, the final kind of push over there. But that's a huge surprise to me.
So speaking of the Oilers, so you're writing and blogging for quite a while now on the Oilers.
Yeah, June of 2013, I think is when we started the Oilers rig.
So maybe tell everyone a little bit about the Oilers rig. Some people that are not familiar.
So I went to college in Springfield, Massachusetts, which Oilers fans may remember as why the hell do we have an AHL affiliate in Western Mass City? So that's where I ended up going to college and studied sports journalism. One of the things that stuck with me on my visits to different colleges from a totally different school too was just blog. Even if you're not making money off of it, and even if it's not the best thing in the world, just do it. Get your name out there and put yourself out there. So after my freshman year, I decided to just start my own Oilers blog, and I think it was Low Tide who I reached out to, and he kind of showed me how to set things up, and slowly but surely people started joining up, and from there it become what it is now. I started as a hobby. I'll just do this throughout college. Whatever happens. And it's going to be, 5 years and about 2 weeks since I graduated. So it's gone a lot longer than I thought it was going to. And I just made myself feel so old.
Well, I don't know how you managed it. I blogged with Oilers Jambalaya for them for 3 years, and then I did with um, off of the Hockey Buzz. Richard Kluche started doing some stuff with Puck Rant. So then I did a little bit there. I was just like, man, I just can't keep coming up with content. This is like crazy on a regular basis. So hats off to you. Let's just do a quick switch here, really quick.
Yeah.
You talked about taking your schooling, your education. So you've done lots of broadcasting. Maybe do you have a favorite highlight moment broadcasting of any specific game, and why?
Oh, for me, it was the NCAA women's ice hockey tournament in March of 2019. I mean, look, it was St. Patrick's Day weekend, Saturday afternoon in Boston. So that kind of set the tone for what the building was like. But that's a historic building that's been around for over 100 years. It's a historic program, and it's the first time they've ever hosted an NCAA tournament game. So that was a thrill. They fell behind 2-0. Northeastern came back, tied the game at 2 late. They ended up losing in overtime, but it was between the atmosphere and because that's the team that I've mostly covered since I've left school. To kind of see where that team started my first year, 16, 17, slowly but surely building up the program. Then to get to that moment in that game, that atmosphere, it was unbelievable. That game has stuck with me even through everything.
Sweet.
That's very impressive. So would you say that Boston has outperformed how they've played in the last decade for you, and like really set the tone for what an elite team they have been in the past decade and moving forward?
Yeah, it's been quite a compare and contrast following the Oilers so closely and what not to do. And then the Bruins on the other end with everything that you should do, right? Go back to the Thornton trade. That was a disaster of a 2-year span for the Bruins. They misjudged the lockout coming out. They thought there was going to be a bunch of guys that they could just get for cheap when really there was only one, and it was Pronger, and he ended up going to Edmonton, ironically enough. And it took them 2-3 years to really bounce back from that. But when they did, they had such a good system of developing guys, drafting guys. They always seemed to make a smart trade. They always seemed to make it smart free agent additions. The game kind of changed and it got a little ahead of management in that 2014, 2015 range. But I mean, the Bruins have been an elite team for so long. And this is the first season outside of 16, 17 where I felt Edmonton's actually done things right. So yeah, I look at the Bruins. I'm like, why, how come they can't do that more, right? Like, that's the model. Do what the Bruins are doing. They've been a fun team to watch. There was a lot of jealousy in high school, but they've been a real fun team to watch. And I do root for them 80 times a year. There's 2 where I won't when they play Edmonton. But other than that, I mean, it's tough not to like that core group.
So blogging on Edmonton, obviously, you've done a lot of blogs that involve Taylor Hall. He left. He's been gone a while. There's always been talk around the rumors of he's coming back to Edmonton. He's coming back to Edmonton. And, of course, a bad season. It's not turning out well in Buffalo for anybody. What was your take on the whole trade and since basically his play since he's arrived over in Boston?
I think it was a home run for the Bruins right off the hop. I mean, Anders Bjork just didn't fit in with Boston. I think he's a skilled player, but they just didn't. He just doesn't fit what they needed in the second line next to David Krejci. So moving out a player that doesn't fit in a second round pick in such an uncertain atmosphere, to me, it's really a no risk trade for Boston. I think the price Edmonton wise, I don't think they had a player like Anders Bjork to move on from off the roster. And I think that complicated things. And, whether you agree with him or not, Ken Holland was never going to move that first, right? So with them out of the picture, I think Boston really was the perfect landing spot for Hall. It's a winning atmosphere. He doesn't have to be the guy. There's a tremendous leadership group there led by Bergeron, Brad Marchand, all those guys. They've really kind of set the tone for leadership in that building. And I think Hall can just come in and be a piece. And Krejci's a pretty darn good second line center in his own right. Craig Smith was struggling on the right wing, but, I think he's a pretty good player. And honestly, Hall's been exactly what they needed. They finally have a second line right now behind the Bergeron line, and they're probably going to be the 3 seed heading into the playoffs out east, but they're as dangerous as anybody in that division. And the Hall trade has really made them that. He's a perfect complement and has reshaped that entire offensive group. I I knew he'd be a good fit, mostly because of course he will, right? Like, you know, after all the years where they just didn't do, and it wasn't his fault why they didn't do well in Edmonton, but after all those years, of course he's going to come to Boston and go on a deep playoff run. He's going to be a catalyst. Like, that's just how it goes. But he's been better than I thought.
So Pavel, you got to ask him this question now because he brought up the word Corsi.
What question would that be, Evan?
The question on analytics, because my co-host and I and a couple of other guests have had our differences on Hall. And like you said, when you were talking, I mean, he's a driver of the puck. I have been a pro supporter, not that whether I like or dislike Hall, but you know, the stats and the analytics show something in a positive framework for him, that I think he is maybe not worth the $8 million, but I've come in and said if the guy could come in for 2 years on a $6 million. But I'm just thinking, you were talking about maybe we could talk about a little bit how Alex sees the analytics to the eye test and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. But before, I gotta ask, as a Boston fan, are you not happy that now Boston has been able to draft both Taylor and Tyler? They had Tyler Seguin, and now they have Taylor Hall.
Well, my phone really hasn't stopped, and this is mostly my father's fault. My phone has barely stopped going off with reminders on the daily that Taylor Hall is now a Bruin and doing well after that whole thing 11 years ago now, which is crazy. But it is wild how that's turned out, right? Like the whole Tyler Seguin situation and the rumors around here about what happened. There are plenty of them. You know, for him to get traded out, and people still talk about how bad that trade was to this day. Now for Taylor Hall to come in and have success here, it is kind of ironic to see that all come full circle for them.
So think of this, guys. Think of this. So if they can't re-sign him, does that mean they lost both Tyler and Taylor?
Yeah, I will say I'll be shocked if he doesn't re-up in Boston. But yeah, I think you have to say that.
I mean, Edmonton and Boston have a lot in common, including the fact that you guys had Peter Chiarelli, who did some wonders in Boston. I mean, he got a cup for you guys.
And he did some wonders
in over here. Yeah, and he didn't do so well after that. But yeah, what are your thoughts on the analytics in terms of whether it is Taylor Hall or some of the other guys on your team, or somebody even like a local boy like Jake DeBrusk, who seems like he should be a 20 goal scorer per year, but he's struggling this year for whatever reason. Do you think it's who he's playing with? Do you think it's just the system? I mean, Bruce Cassidy knows how to get the most out of his guys, and I got to admit, Evan and I really enjoy watching Pasta play. Like, Pasternak is probably one of the most underrated and fun players to watch. The way he warms up for any game is incredible. Watching him is super fun. But your thoughts?
Yeah, Pasta's electric. I mean, he's just yeah, he's a fun guy to watch, and he's a fun guy to have around the city. I will say, for me, for analytics, I think it's a great tool, right? Like, I don't think you can build a team solely off of analytics. I think that there are some faults to it, right? Like Alexander Semin was some analytic darling, and really, you watch him play, and it's like, okay, I mean, he's all right, but there's a lot of things that he doesn't do well that lead to winning hockey. I think the same with Val Nichushkin. Like, he's a really good player by the analytics, but then I watch him, he's probably a really good two-way third-line winger. But I mean, last year people had him over Leon Draisaitl for the Hart. I think there's extremes in both ways. Like, the whole why isn't Zach Kassian playing on the first line thing? Well, the analytics aren't great, and I don't think the eye test is great when he plays on that top line. Like, I think you have to have a good mix with both, and I think the teams that have done it the best, mixing things up, are the teams that have had the most success. I think Tampa Bay, they're so analytics driven with a lot of their skill positions. Braden Point, Tyler Johnson, Nikita Kucherov, these are outstanding analytic players. But then they also realize you need a little bit of that sandpaper too. You need a little bit of that character in the locker room. And, the analytics may not paint Zach Bogosian or Patrick Maroon in the best light, but those are serviceable players that I think a winning team needs. And I think if you're not using every tool available to you, whether, if you're just completely discounting analytics or if you're just completely relying on it, I don't think there's any way you'll have any success. I think you have to use both tools. I really do.
So talking about that sandpaper, let's transition over to the Edmonton Oilers, the team that you write with. for. Well, not for them personally, but write and blog on. So, what do you think in regards? Do they have the sandpaper now that you were talking about? You think they're going to need, or what's your take?
Yeah, I actually do. I mean, Darnell Nurse has been a lot smarter about it this year, and I think that's allowed him to take a step. It's not that he's less aggressive, right? But he's smarter about it. He's picking his spots. Look, I'm not the biggest fan of Zach Cassian's contract, right? And, we talk about having him ride shotgun with Connor McDavid, but that doesn't mean he's a bad player who has no value. Like, I think he is a valuable player who, come the postseason, it'd be pretty nice to have him on a third or fourth line going out there and engaging. He didn't do it in August against Chicago, but I thought he did back in 2017. I thought he was engaged in that San Jose series. I thought he was really good in that series. I thought his best game of the season was the comeback win in the first of those two real intense Montreal games a couple of weeks ago. And he tried to engage in the second game and he hurt himself. But, I think if you have him in the lineup, you have enough between Nurse, between Cassian, between Jujhar Khaira, who has come and stepped up a little bit this year. I think there's enough there. I wouldn't mind one more piece, but Larson's a pretty nasty player in his own right, and I mean that in the best way possible. And I think Oilers fans are about to find out, Dmitry Kulikov's not far off from that.
Yeah, and another guy that's a little bit underrated, but it has a tenacious attitude and personality is Josh Archibald. I find the guy, it's just incredible. For his size and what he does, he will pick a fight with whoever. And he kind of is like a lighter version of Brendan Gallagher. He can skate. Like, Brendan Gallagher is more skilled, of course, and has more upside. But, it's that little guy who's a pest and can get in the way. So,
yeah, I completely forgot about Archibald. That guy's a little wrecking ball out there. And who's been aggravated, and especially in the Montreal games, and, look, McDavid and Draisaitl can go out there and throw a couple hits too if they need to. And I know people have been all over them this year for it, but I've kind of liked that out of them. And naturally, there's been an overreaction out of Montreal. But that just kind of is what I was raised on death taxes, and you get the first penalty at the Forum. That's how I was taught by my grandfather. But yeah, they've been into it in those Montreal games.
I have to say that in the games in the past games there that they've had, the interesting thing that I found was like when they called nothing, they were just leaving it that first game in the back-to-back they had. The second game, it's like it all changed in the almost go into the third period, and they started calling people and everything, it seemed. But it's interesting because I know McDavid's getting in trouble for elbowing, playing dirty, especially from the Montreal fan base. And respectfully, if Calgary was doing that to Edmonton would feel the same way. Even if we have Smeed, if you got Smeed in the back crushing backs and stuff, which he used to always do, which Weber does all the time. It just reminds me when they start letting it go, it gets back to those old days when Mark Messier would just give you a stick or give you an elbow. It's like they had to make room for themselves.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Alan.
I was saying, yeah, I mean, now if you try to make room for yourself, you're the one going to the penalty box. And all of a sudden it's your team that's down a man. And it's tough. It's a real tough spot to be in. Like, I don't know what Shea Weber's going to look like in 2 weeks, right? Like, it doesn't even he's having to use a left shot stick now. So I don't know how effective he's going to be. And I don't know how much punching he's going to want to do when, his hand is just an absolute mess. But I mean, that's not a series that if you can avoid it, I would. I mean, that's not really a team that I think really matches up well with Edmonton. That's a tough matchup for the Oilers.
Well, speaking of questionable hits and hits that are kind of on people's radar, I know on Monday night there was a bit of a questionable hit with Tom Wilson and both Pavel Buchnevich and then on Artemi Panarin, and there was a bit of a scrum. So the league has come out since, and they have only fined Tom Wilson, who's a repeat offender, $5,000, which coincidentally was what McKinnon got fined for throwing his helmet, I think, at Connor Garland or one of the guys in Phoenix and in Arizona. And, of course, McDavid for his elbow, amongst other calls. Alex, we want a hot take. What are your thoughts? Was the call right? Was it wrong? Is it fair?
I think it's so far off base that it's typical for the NHL, right? Like they're very lucky that Panarin didn't smash his head off the ice. And I know we're playing what ifs and that's a dangerous game, but go back and watch that game. You've got a guy in Tom Wilson who's already fired up over a penalty call he didn't like. He's already fired up about getting kicked off not too long before that off a face-off he thought he should have been out there for. He's not a dumb player, right? Like he's very aware when he's on the ice. He's a very good hockey player, all things aside. He's not stupid. He's aware of things. How many times, and Elliot Friedman, I think, pointed this out, how many times have we seen guys realize, okay, this fight's not my weight class. I'm not going to fight, Artemi Panarin because that's just not a fair fight. He engaged in it, right? And, I didn't like the initial punch on Pavel Buchnevich when he was down. I hated that. And then for me, it's not like, I've seen the excuse, well, wrestling happens every night in the NHL. Sure, it does, but you never see a guy get yanked down by his hair like that, especially when he doesn't have a helmet on. Too many guys are aware of the situation, and Wilson knows what he's doing. Maybe if it was somebody like, for example, if that's Panarin doing that on, I don't know, Nicholas Backstrom, I have a little bit more of a leeway for Panarin because that's not who he is. But we're not far removed from Tom Wilson hitting Brandon Carlo so dangerously into the boards that Carlo had blurred vision for days and had mood swings and all kinds of dangerous side effects and was in the hospital from the hit and such. And it's, I know the NHL didn't consider him a repeat offender, but he's a repeat offender. That's just semantics. I mean, it is what it is. For me, this brings you back to Matt Cook. Is it going to take somebody losing their career like Mark Savard, who was a terrific player and had his career cut prematurely, to figure this out with Tom Wilson? Because at the end of the day, I know it's not cut and dry. There could be stuff going on with Tom Wilson, but at the end of the day, people are in danger when he's on the ice doing this stuff. And I think it's the league's responsibility to fix that because, they play Boston in the first round of the playoffs. There's enough hatred between those two sides right now. And if you think, and I love the guy, I really do, on and off the ice, but if you think Brad Marchand's above going back and getting something from the Capitals if Tom Wilson's going out and throwing those hits, I don't know what to tell you. That could, fall into a very ugly situation. Personally, maybe I'm overreacting. I don't think Wilson should be on the ice until opening night next year. I think when you do this so many times, eventually a slap on the wrist isn't enough.
Yeah. The first thing that when I'm watching this thing, I'm looking at this and saying, how is this any different than Bertuzzi and the Steve Moore incident? Like he went after him, he sought him out. And when you, like you said, when you grab, you're catching a person unaware. And we know ice is easy to fall, slip, get hurt. You're supposed to, sportsmanship, right, be able to confront them side to side or front to front. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, how can they even, I don't care if he's never done this before. First offender, never had a suspension before. But I'm looking at this and going, that was scary. And when you hit a guy and he's on the ice, all I could just see is his skull cracking.
Yeah, and now you've also set yourself up for the NHL for a bad scenario tomorrow night. Like these two teams play again, and you're going to put Wilson out there. And the Rangers affiliate is maybe a 2-hour drive up to Hartford where the Wolfpack are. And Mason Gerstein is a big boy, and he has taken on some real tough customers in the American League. And if you think that that's somebody that they would rule out calling out for tomorrow night, like it could get ugly with Wilson. At the very least, suspending Tom Wilson for one game would have at least calmed things down heading into tomorrow night. Now you have a powder keg on national TV with this game on NBC in the States. It could get ugly for the NHL. It could be an embarrassing moment for the league. The Rangers have nothing to play for. They're done. And you listen to them, they're pissed off, and they have a right to be. And they're even more angry today. So, it just takes one guy getting called up who really has nothing to lose, who's ready to go out there and throw a couple punches and do what needs to be done. And then all of a sudden you have that scenario you're talking about, that Bertuzzi Moore incident. This could get really out of hand, and the league is just, we'll let them figure it out. But eventually that's going to bite them, and I got a bad feeling this could be the scenario.
Very true, very true. And What I want to add to the topic is because we focused primarily on Artemi Panarin and Wilson and what had potentially could have been, heaven forbid, it could have been worse. But I also look at the call on Buchnevich because that's where the initial call was for the $5,000. And in my mind, the way that he went down on Buchnevich, and then if you look at the stick, I think the stick over the neck of the player is a very dangerous thing as well. And I think the fact that that didn't get a game, that made me worried because he had the guy's neck next to his stick and was still hitting him. And if just one bad hit and it bounces off or something goes wrong, broken neck right there. And the last thing you want to do is ruin someone's career, especially a young guy like him, right? So, and, even with Panarin, he is a star in the game. The Rangers have a lot of pull. It's definitely going to be interesting to see what they do moving forward, given, the statement that Rangers had made. And now, with what's coming out about possibly George Peros, who knows? It's definitely food for thought.
Well, this is going to make for interesting playoff. We're going to be getting tighter. We got a few more questions we want to get into with Alex here. So why don't we do this? Because we're talking about Boston, we've been talking about Washington. Let's talk about the East right now. Is it the East Division? I get my divisions
yes,
mixed up.
Yeah, it's the East Division. Yep.
So let's talk, Alex. How do you see the rundown happening for the playoffs here? And how do you think the teams are going to fare?
Oh, this is to me the toughest division to predict because there's really no, like, out west you have whoever that 4 seed's going to be, probably St. Louis clearly below the top 3. Same in the Central. Nashville probably clearly below the top 3. I think Toronto and Edmonton should be meeting in the second round of the North. We'll see if that is how it goes. I have no real good feel for what's going to happen in the East. Like, Washington, I think, is a stacked team top to bottom. Except for goaltending. Their goaltending worries me, right? Like, there's nothing consistent there that I look at as, okay, that's the guy that's going to lead them to 16 wins this spring. Boston, same issues. Tuukka Rask, I think, is an outstanding goaltender, but there have been issues with Rask in the money games over the years. And yes, Mike Riley has helped Boston's defense, but that's still not a great defensive group, especially with Carlo, unfortunately, being up and down since that injury. I mean, really, it's Charlie McAvoy, and then they're just trying to piece something together. So that's worrisome. The Islanders' offense has surprisingly been awful since the Palmieri trade. Are they going to be able to figure that out? And then you have the Penguins, who just seem to be sticking around, right? Like, I don't know about their goaltending, but they've been good. Do they have enough depth forwards? Well, Jeff Carter's risen from the grave and been outstanding, and they've weathered all these injuries, and now Malkin's back, and these guys coming back. So, really, for me, any of these 4 teams can win it. I honestly lean right now, looking at the teams where they stand, I lean Pittsburgh winning that, coming out of that, but I would not be shocked if it was any of the 4. I really wouldn't.
What are you thinking of, Pavel?
So I agree a lot with Alex. My thing with Pittsburgh is that they've lost the last 7 of their 8 playoff rounds, right? Last year they got swept by the Islanders, and the year before, the reason being Barry Trotz's coaching. And because of the familiarity with him being in Washington for so long and them facing off nonstop, I think Islanders can beat out Pittsburgh if that's how they play. Washington and Boston, I'm going to say, just because of injuries, I think Washington just can supersede it, but I agree. I think their defense their goaltending is a little questionable, but I think Washington can come out of that. And then between them and Islanders, I'm going to give it to the Islanders. They made it to the top 4 last year. They've been consistent. They lost Adam Pelech, which I think Joe Sakic stole that trade for Colorado, and they're still been able to be a defensive team. And they've been able to score, which is something that you don't usually associate, right? You've had Peugeot, you've had Barzell step up and really play his game. And with, Kyle Palmieri coming in and Travis Zajac, because of Anders Lee stepping down, that captain and whatnot. But I still think the Islanders can make a run, right? But I don't know what will take place. But what are your thoughts, Evan?
Yeah, I agree with you guys, man. I think they're all going to be 6-7 game series, and I think they are going to beat the crap out of each other, which means whoever comes out of the East, I don't think they're going to be winning their next round. I really don't in the Final 4. I think that that they're going to be done because they're just going to be so wasted with some of the teams. But if I'm going to pick, I and again, I know people are going to call me a Hall homer, but man, when you can slip in as a number 5 guy at that kind of scoring rate that he can bring in, and he's like rejuvenated, man. He's like a kid again playing back in Edmonton. So I'm actually going to go with Boston on this coming out of this area. So let's jump over to the north. So what are we thinking here? So when you're blogging on the Oilers rig there, tell us what are you telling folks when it comes to the playoffs here? Do they have a chance?
They certainly have a chance. I mean, look, when you have the best player in the game, and it's by an even wider margin than any of us thought coming into this year. And then you have another guy like Leon Draisaitl, you have a chance any night, right? And when Mike Smith playing the way he has, which is, I mean, look, if you told me at the start of the year this is how Mike Smith was going to play and you actually believed yourself, I would have, out of the good of my heart, I would have asked you to go get yourself checked, make sure you're okay, because that is just outrageous. But here he is, right? So, I mean, they have a chance. I think they're the second best team in the division. I think the regular season standings show that. Toronto is just so deep, and I know Leafs fans, whatever, they are annoying, I know, for the most part, but that's a fun team, and the Leafs have that depth. They have that extra thing to play for. They got Joe Thornton there. Nick Foligno is going to be a terrific addition for what they're looking for. I like the defensive group that Toronto's put together, believe it or not. For me, it's going to come down to goaltending, right? Like, can Frederik Andersen come back? And can he play at the level Frederik Andersen is capable for? I know a lot of people blame him for Toronto's playoff mishaps the last couple of years, but I mean, last year in the bubble, that is pure bad luck. They dominated Columbus in that series. And before that, they lost to a better team in Boston twice. That just is what it is. But I think Toronto's the best team in that division. I think Edmonton's second. Winnipeg, I have no idea what's going on right now. The bottom has fallen out there. Ehlers is an important player. I don't think he's that important. So that's the ideal matchup for any of these top 2 teams. In Montreal, I've said it all year, I don't think Montreal is a great hockey team. They have terrific goaltending, and for some reason, Edmonton can't beat them. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the size, the physicality.
Yeah.
Maybe they let more go, whatever it may be. They're all excuses because Edmonton just can't find a way against Montreal. But I think those are the top 2 teams. Clearly, they should meet in the second round. I would love to see Montreal 4th against Toronto, selfishly for Edmonton. But I've always heard about, this original 6, which I want to see these 2 finally. I was born in 94. Never seen it. So I'd love to see Montreal play Toronto in the playoff.
I wanted to just, before Pavel probably going to comment here on his part, on his thoughts here, I just want to say with the Montreal Canadiens, the reason I have my own reasons why I see Edmonton struggling. They play more of a zone defense when they play back on their bit with those big guys. They don't have the speed to keep up, but they box out. They literally, it's almost like they're playing the penalty kill, and they're boxing out the Oilers so they cannot get into the inside. And then they just punish them. They just punish them, and they're having a hard time breaking through. The Oilers can't get those quick breakouts, so they're gonna. This is gonna come down to coaching if they meet in the playoffs. That's my opinion. I think that Tippett's gonna have to work with the boys to find another way to work around it. But I agree. I think Toronto's the team. Phil?
Nope. Fair. I think the one name that kind of spooks Edmonton, and maybe because it has a history of bad luck in Edmonton, is Corey Perry. For some reason, that pesky guy is on Montreal Canadiens, and whenever he's on, like you'd love to have him. He's like another Brad Marchand. He's a Tom Wilson. He's a pest. You don't want him around, but like you'd love to have him on your team because he does the very thing to aggravate your top stars, right? And he doesn't care. He could be a third, fourth liner and winger, and he's good. He gets off, right? Toronto, very deep. I agree. I think more so Campbell will start. But I want to make sure that Campbell can actually perform because, even though he had that great stretch, and I think he broke a record of 11 wins straight starts, he's been a little bit shaky from then. And, whether or not it's going to be Anderson if he gets enough time in before the end of the season, or if Riddick's going to be the backup just in case, right? But in terms of their forward depth, in terms of their Defense, it's solid. The one question where I think Toronto really needs to worry about is their power play. For whatever reason, all that firepower, and they cannot score. I think they've been kind of hit and miss in the last little bit. As for Winnipeg, again, could be like Montreal, where if Jake Allen or even Carey Price and Hellebuck get back and play unreal, like Vesna level style, like last year, anything can happen, right? Last year, Price came in and destroyed and stopped Pittsburgh Penguins, like Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. Like, that's near impossible, right? But that's where I think would happen. But I'm hoping to see whether it's Edmonton, Montreal, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Edmonton, Toronto. It's going to be an exciting series for all Canadian fans.
So here's a question, Alex. We're going to get ready to wrap up here, guys, because we're coming to the end of our show. It's been a blast. But before we do that, I want to ask you, where do you get your creativity for what you're going to be writing? And how often are you writing an article right now on Oilers Rig?
I try to get at least 2, maybe 3 a day on a game day. But you know what's great about in season is a lot of the thinking is just taken away from me, right? Like I can look and say, okay, let's see who said what today, and let's pick out a couple interesting quotes and let's build something around those, and make it more of a newsy thing, especially this time of year where there's just not a ton of rumors and obviously the interest in what the team is thinking heading towards the playoffs. So they take, that takes a lot of it, a lot of the creativity, I guess, out of my hands. But, when we get towards free agency, we get towards the trade deadline, I'm fortunate enough to have enough people that will, speak to me that I may be able to formulate some speculation on a couple of things that, I feel comfortable with the people telling me that enough to put that out there. I feel good about it, not like I'm just throwing something against the wall. So those are a lot of fun. I love being able to talk about that stuff because to me, like, I love the game. I love watching the game. I love being at the game, broadcasting it, but I love the team building aspect of it as well. So for me, I like to do a lot of that speculative stuff, because, it brings into that team building and it gets people excited too, right? Like that's what it's all about at the end of the day is entertainment, getting people excited. And, in the middle of June, people would much rather be reading about, what the Oilers could do trade-wise or what they could do in free agency as opposed to, here's a guy from some town in Switzerland you never heard of who could be drafted in the 7th round.
Which I noticed yesterday you put out the tweet on Konolev. So we have a signing. We mentioned it here on Two Guys, but go ahead. Maybe tell us a little bit about him quickly.
Yeah, from what I gather, he's small. He's tiny, right? He's athletic. He's tiny, but he's put up good numbers in the KHL, and that's past my bedtime here when those games start. So I haven't seen it too much of him. But everybody I talk to thinks that he's a guy that may only need 1 year in the AHL before becoming a backup in the NHL. So I think that's a good signing for the Oilers, and they've Stuart Skinner's had a good year, so they've got a couple things bubbling under right now.
And so, if you could broadcast right now or write for, with, or alongside any writer or broadcaster that's currently on, or maybe somebody who's long gone from the industry, is there somebody that you would love, that you idolize, or that you kind of follow?
Yeah, there's a couple broadcasters that I'd love to have the chance to. So being an Oilers fan in Boston, we bought the package every year, and Hockey Night in Canada was on for me on Saturday nights. And, for me, it was guys like Chris Cuthbert and Gord Miller, who I really enjoyed listening to growing up. Early, it was Gary Thorne before ESPN initially lost the rights down here. But John Forsland's a big one that really sticks out to me. The only professional broadcaster that came out of Springfield College. So I think that'd be pretty cool to work the same game as him one day. Obviously, him going out to Seattle and having an all Springfield booth would be pretty cool one day. But he's definitely a guy I look towards. And one guy who I worked with in the AHL the year I interned, who is a guy I look up to and somebody who's taught me a ton, is Andy Zilch of the San Diego Gulls, who is the Ducks affiliate. And, he's somebody. It's a name I'm sure you'll hear in the coming years. He's a great broadcaster, and he's taught me a lot about the game. And the broadcasting game, I should say.
Fair enough. So, Game 7, it's Edmonton versus Boston Bruins for the Stanley Cup Final because they're facing off. who do you cheer for, or can you be impartial?
Oh, there's no doubt. Like my Oilers jersey's on. There's no doubt about that in my mind. That's my team. I'll root for the Bruins in any other scenario, but in that one, I gotta have the blue and orange on. That would be a lot. Man, I don't know if I could. It'd be a lot of fun, but that series would be quite a week and a half out here.
So, hey, quick question. Broadcasting. So I believe you had 2015, 2016. You got the opportunity to broadcast for the AHL Springfield Falcons.
Yes.
What was that experience like?
It was wild. So that they were the Coyotes affiliate that year.
That's why you were. Is that what you said? Wild because they were Coyotes? No.
Oh yeah, it was wild because it was the Coyotes affiliate. No, it really was, because at the end of the year, like, we had heard all the rumors on Twitter and stuff, like, oh, they're gonna move the team, we're gonna move, and you don't realize, like, that's people's livelihoods, right? So, that's the other part of it when a minor league team moves or there's trades at the deadline. Like, I remember deadline day, there we had a ton of AHL veterans, and the Coyotes were looking to cut costs, and we had like 8 guys get moved out, and it was crazy being in the office that day. Like, we were at the final game of the season, and you had people, again, last place team all year, and it just, nobody was in the stands, and then that last game was packed because nobody wanted to lose the team. And it was just, it was crazy. And then I showed up the next morning, and people are packing their boxes and coming into my internship. It was like, oh, this is bizarre. Obviously they ended up getting the team back, but it's like, this is crazy. And that was in the middle of all the John Scott stuff when he had gotten sent down, and we didn't know if he was coming down or not. There were some stories that year, but it was a great experience. I learned a lot about broadcasting. I learned a lot about minor league sports that year, and it was a lot of fun. It really was.
Well, we're gonna have to pick your brain on another show, definitely, for some of the stories.
For sure. Yeah, and if we find ourselves, or any of our followers who are liking and subscribing, find ourselves in Massachusetts at any point in the post-COVID world, or if they can travel within states, what would you recommend? Is there any hotspots, highlights that you love?
If you're looking for food, you got to go to the North End. It's some of the best Italian food you'll ever find. It's old school. Uber or take the train there, because you're not parking on those streets. I'll tell you that right now. It's a real fun area to walk around. It's got a real old school vibe, great food. I would recommend to any sports fan Fenway. Just for the experience of it, the atmosphere around it. It's something that I think any baseball fan should experience. But really, just the city as a whole, it's the city of Boston's a smaller city than you'd think, and there's a lot going on in it. But for me, like, I don't know anybody who's not into food, so if you're into food, the North End is where you got to go. I mean, there's so much there to just walk around, and there's, like, it's almost like going back in time with some of the buildings and stuff. It's really cool to walk around there and experience that.
Oh, that's awesome. So Alex, if someone wants to follow you, anyone that's tuning into the show and checking, how would they follow you?
I'm on Twitter at Alex_Thomas14, and then at the Oilers Rig as well, where all the Oilers stuff will be for the rig, and then on my personal account, Alex_Thomas14, will be all my broadcasting stuff and all my writing stuff, whatever comes up over the next couple of months.
Great. We'd love to share some of your articles and your thoughts, so we can read up on what's the latest and what's the greatest. I mean, being from Boston and in that area, you just have so many freaking amazing teams. You got the Celtics, you got the New England Patriots, and you got the Boston Bruins. I mean, you guys are not lacking championships.
No, in fact, people were complaining about a drought a couple of months ago, and I just had to laugh at it. It's like, that's outstanding. What happens if the Patriots, the Red Sox, and the Celtics all missed the playoffs in the same year?
Yeah.
We may find out.
Did you tell them to check in with Toronto if you want to talk about a drought?
Yeah, no kidding. They go, oh, the Patriots missed the playoffs. So, like, it's 1 year, man. Like, the Oilers did it 10 straight, but we're just getting started here. Buckle up, It's...
Well, Ben, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been an honor, and hopefully we can have you on again sometime down the road.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, guys. Thanks. I had a lot of fun doing this.
Awesome. Well, in the meantime and in between time,
Keep your sticks on the ice. Stay safe, everyone, and have a good night.
cheers.